Welcome to Stay Home, Stay Focused. I'm Jack Moline. I'm the president of Interfaith Alliance, and my special guest today is Guthrie Graves-Fitzsimmons, who is with the Center for American Progress. Tell me your title exactly, because I'm going to promote you if I do it.
I'm a fellow with the Faith and Progressive Policy Initiative. It's a long title, so.
It's a long title. We'll unpack the whole thing. So let me ask you, before we get into anything else, Guthrie, what I ask everybody: how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm able to work from home. My husband is a therapist and is able to do teletherapy. And we actually welcomed a dog into our family, a little puppy, at the beginning of February, who has been a real comfort to us as we stay home and stay healthy, and our families are healthy. So doing okay.
Great.
And before we jump into things, I just want to thank you for your leadership and Interfaith Alliance and all your members around the country who are watching and all the work they do in their communities.
Thank you. Thank you, Guthrie.
Okay.
Thank you. And from the sublime to the ridiculous, what's the dog's name?
Chelo, but we call him Che for short.
And does that have a meaning, or is it a hybrid of something?
Cielo means sky or heaven in Italian.
Oh, Cielo, Cielo.
Cielo, yeah, Cielo. We call him Che.
Very nice. Like Guevara. Very nice. And while you're sequestered in your home for the most part, how do you keep your focus beyond, staying safe and maintaining social distancing?
Yeah, walks are a big thing for me. I've been going on these 8-mile walks. And I love the kind of movement that you do with people, at least I do, and hopefully everyone watching does, when you're getting close to someone else who's out for their socially distanced walk, and you kind of I go pretty far into the street to avoid coming, anywhere near, not just 6 feet, but, I want to stay 30 feet away from everybody. And it's this choreography that we're all doing to stay apart while also being in solidarity with each other. And I think every time I do it, I think it's beautiful. And then I return home back to my quarantine and I am uplifted a little bit.
There's this dance that we do, and I've also noticed, I don't know if you're doing this as well, I greet everybody I avoid. It's sort of a compensation for not wanting to get too close to them. And it's a nice practice I hope that I will bring with me when we get beyond this pandemic, of greeting everyone as our ancestor Aaron did, with a pleasant countenance. So let's hope that continues. I want you to start by explaining to viewers and listeners who may not know exactly what the Center for American Progress is.
The Center for American Progress is a Washington, D.C. based think tank that advocates and studies and does research across a broad range of different progressive issue areas, from healthcare policy. The Center for American Progress was instrumental in passing the Affordable Care Act, to national security policy, to gun violence prevention. And it's existed since 2003 and is one of the kind of major players in producing new ideas that then become legislation. And one of our 20 policy teams is the faith team, which studies and advocates around the role of religion in society. And that's the team I'm on.
How does one become a part of CAP? Is it are you recruited? Do you apply for jobs? Are there people who in academia contribute to it?
Yeah, it's a mix. There's a staff that we have job listings. People are continuing to be hired throughout this pandemic. Actually, people are being onboarded virtually.
Good. It's good to know. AmericanProgress.org. If you're
AmericanProgress.org, you can go find career listings. And then there's a number of fellows and senior fellows who have a range of different kind of backgrounds. I come from advocacy and communications background, and we support the different policy teams. And so, yeah, there are different ways to get involved. You can get involved on social media, follow our accounts. We put out different kind of products. You can share them. And then we have on the faith team, one way you can specifically learn about what we do is we put out a newsletter every other week. So you can sign up for that at americanprogress.org with
It's a
some
good.
kind of, and then click on religion and you'll be able to find that sign up.
It's a good newsletter. I
Oh,
I
thank
read
you.
it religiously. When people hear about faith and progressive politics, we mostly think of the progressive politics side of it, the social
Mhm.
justice pursuit. How does, for lack of a better generic term, how does church fit into progressive politics?
I think it's different for everyone. And it's a complicated subject because in a pluralistic society, everyone has different religious views, and we don't want to get anywhere near the kind of religious nationalism that we see on the right.
Sure.
For me, it's a kind of part of my growing up personal story of being raised by two union organizers. My parents both retired at the end of January from 41 and 35 years of union organizing, and being raised in a progressive Methodist church where going out and being on the picket line and hearing the stories about Jesus seemed like part of the same story. And then growing up and discovering that narrative had been wasn't exactly the reigning cultural narrative in our country. I think, to put it nicely, that the religious right had done so much harm to that narrative that then I felt compelled to like be a part of that process. But for me, growing up, it just seemed natural that the your values you learned in your religious community were a part of how you engage politics and our collective life together.
CAP, and particularly your stream of thought in CAP, just dropped on Facebook today a video about the damage that's being done to guidance for various cabinet departments: Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Labor, the Department of Justice, the State Department, the Department of Education. Each has a set of new rules and new regulations that have been issued that CAP considers dangerous. And then there's a whole other set that affect 9 different departments. Just to
Mm-hmm.
let you know, I'm following what you guys do. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. We did research along with our partners at the American Civil Liberties Union and Movement Advancement Project. So I want to give them credit as well, to put out this document called Connecting the Dots, which is about this religious exemptions and religious freedom agenda of the Trump administration that we believe has flown under the radar of kind of quietly rolling back civil rights protections that protect the LGBTQ community, that protect women who are trying to seek out reproductive health care, that protect religious minorities. And they're expanding this idea that if a conservative person claims religious liberty, it's against my religious values, then I can do whatever I want, basically. And we're seeing that. I just wrote a piece last week for CNN about how people are using that kind of same argument during this pandemic, where they're saying it's my religious liberty to keep my church open during the pandemic, even though public health orders can be equally applied under the Constitution to all gatherings,
Right.
including houses of worship. And so the video we put out, which hopefully people will go check out, AmericanProgress.org or any of our social media channels, goes through all of these different executive agencies and how they're implementing it. When this document was in kind of production from before I started at CAP. I started on February 1st. And when I saw it, I was kind of taken aback. And I think about these things all the time. So I think for the person that maybe isn't that familiar with it, it's a helpful way to see how it's happening across the administration, even
Yeah,
including international policy. You mentioned the
right.
State Department. There's an intent by the Trump administration to redefine human rights globally and to limit it in a much more conservative direction. And so that's related to what they're doing at the Health and Human Services, and how they want to deny people access to programs under the Housing and Urban Development. So all these things are part of an agenda to advance their version of religious liberty.
It's one of the reasons that Interfaith Alliance began this series that you're in the middle of right now. Is we knew that people would be so focused on their personal life and their personal safety that things would begin to escape their attention. I've said before in my conversations with people, if you turn on the nightly news now, you get 25 minutes of COVID virus and then 5 minutes of how people are positively responding to it. And everything else is still going on while nobody's paying attention. So I appreciate your being able to highlight that a little bit. CAP, being a progressive organization, is obviously focused on the First Amendment, as Interfaith Alliance is, and the separation of religion and government. How should religion and government interact in a society that pursues progressive values?
The government should obviously not preference any one religious group over another. That's foundational to what it means to defend the First Amendment. We should also, though, value the role faith plays in motivating people, in having an active part of people's lives. I think sometimes we can take the kind of keep church out of politics is a very good value that I think all progressives share. And we're rightly concerned about Christian nationalism and the kind of how the far right veers, sees The Handmaid's Tale and is like, yeah, I want that. And kind of a theocracy is very appealing. But then we also have a long tradition of people being inspired by their faith during the great advances of the progressive movement in just the past 100 years, the New Deal era, the Civil Rights Movement era. So many of the people that were engaged in that progressive activism were doing it because of their faith. And so I think there's an appreciation and recognition of the role religion plays in people's lives. That's also part of this equation. And then I think there are true threats to religious freedom and religious liberty right now in the country. The rise in anti-Semitism, the different iterations of President Trump's Muslim ban, the just blatant anti-Muslim bigotry coming from this administration are real threats. And the kind of gaslighting we see about religious liberty, the threats to so-called religious liberty that you hear so often about, I think serve to kind of cloak the real attacks against minorities that are happening. That the same kind of groups that are claiming to be victims of religious liberty infringements are actually the ones, supporting and advancing the actual threats to religious liberty.
Very important points that we shouldn't lose the forest for the trees here. Mm-hmm. One way that CAP is actually promoting the positive role of faith and religion in our national politics was by asking 12 prominent faith leaders. I just point out that I was not one of them. What questions they would ask the presidential candidates who were running before this matter was settled. I have the list of 12 in front of me, which I don't need to recite unless you don't remember which one is your favorite, and then I'll give you a choice.
You can't pick a favorite child. That's like I will say, before I came to CAP, the favorite product that the team I'm on now put out is this Faith Leaders to Watch list. Every year since 2012, and the faith team has existed at CAP, I should point out, since CAP was started in 2003. So it's been a commitment from CAP for a long time to faith. But this Faith Leaders to Watch list came out, and it recognized that people are doing this work all across the country on so many different issues. From a faith perspective, across all the issues CAP works on. And every year CAP has highlighted a different slate of people, and then that raises their media profile, and you can see that build over time, this kind of cohort of faith-based activists. And we revisited with some of them, which is really nice to see what they were thinking about this election. I'll point out one, not my favorite, but one was revisiting with Katie Zay, the interim executive director of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, is one area that I think often in the larger narrative about faith and politics is lost, is that there's a consistent and always has been faith-based push for reproductive health care that is really important to always include in these discussions about faith on the left, because I could go on and on about this all day, and I know this is only 20 minutes, but you see when you talk about, especially when you talk about Democrats that are religious or even progressive people of faith, there's sometimes a hidden implicit in that those people are maybe socially conservative. And now you've seen some weakening around, well, maybe they're okay with LGBTQ rights, but they're still anti-abortion activists. And so I think it's always important to include the faith voice for reproductive choice in all of these discussions.
We have to keep it in front of us as being part of the health care that everybody is entitled to, both by law and from a faith perspective, by morality, I would suggest. You know, all change is hard, Guthrie. I don't have to tell you that. You're in the business of serving up change in manageable pieces to the American public. But what do we say to conservatives who are connected to a particular way of life about the need for progress in society that is going to necessarily undermine what they find familiar?
I think we go back to loving our neighbor as we would want to be loved. I think about the example of LGBTQ acceptance and the radical change we've seen towards affirmation, acceptance, both in society and religious institutions in just my lifetime. And I think about how it happened through personal relationships as a key driver. Of just how would my child want to be treated? A lot of people changing their minds about LGBTQ rights because of a queer family member. People changing I worked for several years on countering Islamophobia, and the amount of people that said, "Oh, I finally met the amount of people who don't know someone who's Muslim in this country is staggering."
It is.
And when you actually ask people, and we did a lot of these kind of studies about what are your views about American Muslims, it's directly correlated to whether or not you know someone who's Muslim.
Right.
So I would bring it back to being in relationship with people and ask, because then the question of human dignity changes from an abstract one about tradition, and we could complicate what it means to be traditional and those norms, but it changes from one of theology or doctrine and tradition to one of a concrete view of, does this person deserve dignity? Do I deserve dignity? Do all people deserve to live free and equally? And that radically changes. And we know from not just LGBTQ rights or anti-Muslim bigotry, the movement to combat that those personal relationships transform people's views at large. And I know somebody, that would be my advice to somebody who maybe where we disagree. And it applies to reproductive health care. Meet someone who has had to terminate a pregnancy. Let's transform things through relationship.
I've found that CAP has promoted the notion that just because you disagree with someone on a policy matter does not give you permission to denigrate them as a human being or as an actor in the political process. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, what true progressive politics are about. It's not about excluding. It's about being as inclusive as we can possibly be while affirming the opportunities for everybody. We are just about at the end of our time, believe it or not. These sessions go so fast. I like to ask people at the end of our conversation what they can suggest to people who are watching and listening that will inspire or engage them during these times that we're all so closed in. Do you have a suggestion?
What can inspire? Book recommendation?
Whatever you want.
I'll give a book recommendation. Something I'm reading right now, American Prophets by Jack Jenkins. A great book that actually starts, chapter 1 talks about the Faith Initiative at CAP. But touches on so many different points that we've been talking about, which is the role of faith in progressive politics. Jack Jenkins is a national reporter at Religion News Service, a former senior writer, I believe, at the faith team at CAP. But
And one of the best in the business right now.
definitely one of the best in the business. And I would highly recommend that gives me a lot of hope, because I draw such inspiration from seeing what other people are doing and kind of moving the ball forward. Reverend Barber features a lot in it, and he's out there right now pushing this narrative of staying home and not reopening because it will save lives, which is an important thing. But just to draw inspiration from all these other movements, and Jack's book does a really good job of that.
Wonderful. And just in case we haven't said it enough in the past 20 minutes, it's AmericanProgress.org, and you can find all sorts of information on everything we talked about today and more. Guthrie, thanks so much for being with me today, and to those of you who are viewing and listening, stay home, stay focused.